All right, we are back again for another exciting episode of the Moby Dick Book Club. Um, all of this is happening very suddenly right now, so I don't have a link to the Discord server in the description of the video yet. But if you're interested in getting in on the discussions, that is where all of this is managed. So we read chapters 35 through 40 for this week's discussion. And um, we hear about the masthead when the whaling ships would leave port. They will send somebody up to the masthead to look out for different whales. And we get to hear all about it. And it sounds like Ishmael is not much of a person up there. So he starts off talking about historically what the different masthead operators have been. He goes first to Egypt and looks at the pyramids, which were obviously for people to go up and do astronomy, as was thought in those days. Talked about Saint Simon the Stylite, who spent most of his life on a pillar. Talked about the statues of Napoleon and Washington, Nelson as being kind of a modern stylite or people up on the masthead, and talked about how the Nantucketeers used to have watchtowers set up all along the coastline to look for signs of whales. Talked about the contemplation that a person like Ishmael would easily fall into on the masthead, and how they had the crow's nest in the north, a little hut or a cabin on top of the mast in order to stay warm, and some interesting injunctions towards young Platonists out on the sea and how they need to be careful. So the masthead being kind of an interruption of the action, more of a meditation of what life on sea is like. What did you gentlemen think about that?
Counselor, you want to go first?
I don't have a whole lot to start with. I just wanted to kind of, with the point of Saint Simeon the Stylite, just wanted to show really quickly the interestingly, I think he had actually learned from another guy who was also a stylite. So it's kind of pictured here in this icon that there were two of them, but there is actually kind of like a handful of these guys who would just live up there on these pillars. But that was, I thought it was really interesting just kind of seeing this this association between just like anyone standing on a pillar at all compared to, you know, like a guy standing on a masthead, and that it didn't actually matter necessarily if they were out at sea or not. It was kind of like the camaraderie of the profession.
Yeah, you get a lot of that natural symbolism. This person has to go up higher in order that they can see farther, and Ishmael links that to the Platonists, who quite famously go up to the quote unquote realm of the forms. Whether or not Plato really thought that was a place that you could go, he probably didn't. He probably just used that as a metaphor. That it's a useful metaphor because that's how things actually work. His injunction to the Platonists, or to ship captains, not to get too many Platonists on board because they won't actually spot any whales. They'll be too lost in contemplation. I suppose the smaller boats that you've been on, Mark, probably didn't have mastheads that you could climb up on.
No, smaller boats do not have mastheads. You don't need them either. But there's a lot to being up there because a boat is a fulcrum on the water. And if you're up high, aside from being isolated from the rest of the crew, which, might be interesting, and getting a better view. So you get the better view at the cost of camaraderie, at the cost of community, at the cost of, a human interaction, since it's very isolating. But also the pitch of the ship is much more of a factor to you because the ship is a fulcrum on the water, right? So as pitchy as the ship is, we'll say down here, it's way worse as you get higher.
Yes.
on
What's
the mast.
one foot of rocking back and forth to be 3 or 4 feet way up there?
Something like that. It depends how, right? Obviously, depends how high. Also, I mean, people use this to their advantage. So, the kind of sailing that I started with was on a catamaran. And catamaran has two hulls, not one, right? So it's two hulls and then something in the platform in the middle, usually a canopy. Actually, there are hard deck. The larger, like the ferries and stuff, are hard deck uh, catamarans. But uh, one of the things people do with catamarans is they take one hull up, which increases the speed of the boat immediately because you have half the drag, right? And so now the mast is way over. Hopefully not too far, right? So your boat's leaning, your mast is leaning, and everything's tilting. And one of the features of, say, a 15 or 17-foot Hobie cat, for example, is that it has a trapeze on it. So you can go out, even though you can't, like the mast is not strong enough for one person, but there's a wire you attach to the top of the mast, and you can go out from the boat on the trapeze over the water at speed. Right. So, it can be quite fun, but being on the mast is wholly different because you're much higher. These boats are pretty large in the scheme of things, and so you're pretty far up. But you're really super isolated, and you're supposed to be. The factor people don't really understand. It's one thing to be isolated. It's another thing to be isolated, we'll say, within a room. It's another thing entirely to be isolated where almost all of your view is entirely flat from your perspective. When you're looking out over the ocean, you see ocean and sky, and a line between them, maybe. And that line is sort of hard to discern. And like, what's going on, right? Because it's not clear to you when you're in that position what's happening, right? It's very, very disorienting. This is why people get seasick a lot, to look at the ocean. The other way to get seasick is not to look at the ocean. No frame of reference. You get seasick either way. So, right. So there's a lot of symbolism in this idea of the masthead itself.
I wanted to, I noticed at the end of the chapter when Ishmael was talking about being up in the masthead, he's talking about the kind of meditative, I don't know, trance he gets put in. Yeah, I was getting this sense from the book of how much of a boring and solitary time it must be spending all those hours up there. And then Mark, you just pointed out how also there's no people, no community or anything. And so that also, yeah, to me, it sounds like a pretty, I don't know, not the sort of place I would want to spend any significant amount of time in. But Ishmael seems to be presenting this as like a really, like the best place to be. He seems to be thinking that being in this philosophical, meditative state is like the highest kind of experience you can attain. And then he says, like, move your foot or hand an inch, slip your hold at all, and your identity comes back in horror. It's like, yeah, just being, it's like for him, being around other people, going through the motions of life is just, I guess, well, a horror, he says, and just being in this thoughtful state that the masthead affords him is just, I guess, where he would prefer to be all the time.
But he acknowledges the danger of it, right?
Yeah.
So when you're up in, we could say, the spiritual or the ethereal or in heaven, those all kind of be the same thing. You're kind of rocking back and forth very easily. You get lost in your thoughts. You don't have your own sense of yourself about you. But if you move your hand or foot an inch, you slip your hold at all, and your identity comes back to you over Descartesian vortices you hover. And it's really interesting that he would highlight Descartes here, right? Because a lot of people would think that Descartes and Plato would be like natural natural allies because of the what their focus on the spiritual end of things. Descartes split the universe in two when he talked about res cogitans, thinking things, and res extensans, things extended into three-dimensional space, right? So you're like, oh well, he's got a real emphasis on spiritual thinking things, but he also he split the universe in two, and you might go from the thinking thing down into the extended thing, and hit yourself there on your way down, and maybe that won't be a very pleasant experience for you. Descartes also being at the forefront of the scientific resolutions of the 16th and 17th centuries.
So to take that a little bit further, so we've been talking about the pillar, or like the what's it? Well, the pillar in the tent, right? It's the connection between heaven and earth, and like what's the crow's nest, right, or the masthead? It's the top of the pillar, right? So that's the thing that is in connection to heaven. And here it is associated with both the act of science and the act of philosophizing or relating to the heavenly. And so if we take the last paragraph, like I think that's actually related to meditation also, right? So you have people who end up in these states, and I don't know if it's in this chapter, but I think he also mentions drifting away and not being able to maintain focus on watching whales, but more this being captured by your imagination, right? And so you end up in, if you go with the Platonic thing, right? Like if you go into a deeply meditative state, you end up relating to something that's more like forms, right? And it's removed from the more physicality, and it takes this an ineffable nature. And then when your body calls out to you for whatever reason, right? Like you drop. Like let's just say that there's danger, right? Like now your physical system rudely interrupts you, and you fall down back into reality because you have to deal with it. And I think that's kind of what's mentioned around there. Also, in the middle of the chapter, it starts saying, "For as the soul is glued inside of its fleshly tabernacle and cannot freely move about in it, nor even move out of it without running great risk of perishing, like an ignorant pilgrim crossing the snowy Alps in winter. So a watch coat is not so much of a house as a mere envelope or additional skin encasing you. You cannot put a shelf or chest drawers in your body. No more can you make a convenient closet from your watch coat." So that's kind of like, well, we were talking about thrones and places to host, right? Like to host the soul, right? Like so your body is hosting your soul, and in some sense, the crow's nest, or what's the word, the masthead, is hosting the observer, and you get this weird relation there. Where there's like a lot of symbolism, although I can't really grasp onto it right now. And the last thing I wanted to add is, what does the mast do? Well, like it holds up the sail, right? Like what does the sail capture? Well, it captures the wind, which is the spirit, right? So there's this pillar that holds the thing, that captures the spirit, that moves it, right? And then there's a navigational aspect that's in the masthead, because it's also looking for land, right? And that's been presented as something negative, right? Like it's something that you should shy away from. So that's all really interesting. And like, what does it mean to shy away from shores? Well, that means that you don't want to have something concrete, right? Like you want to stay adrift. That's some associations there.
Well, I want to add to that because a couple of things kind of came to mind. That you have kind of he talks about the wash coat as the covering, and then you have this kind of you're up there all the way detached from the rest of the crew up at the top, and then it's sort of the masthead is sort of like hosting the person that's up there getting a better view. But I wanted to point out that on the southern whaling ships, and it does mention in here that there is not a crow's nest. So Ishmael kind of envies the northern ships because they actually have a room that you can sit down in. And that the guy even had, the guy who invented it had his rifle there so that he could shoot at narwhals and stuff while he was sitting up there and even drinking alcohol and enjoying himself with, the comfort and everything. So there was a lot of constraint and comfort inside of that where he could also focus and he could see easily. And even to the point where he could interact with stuff with his rifle. Whereas it sounds like Ishmael is standing basically on like buckhorns or like the rungs of a ladder or something like that. So his heels are just like hooked over that. So he has 360 degrees of no coverage. So he's completely unveiled up there, and also his mind is straying and everything. So he's just kind of getting everything is just kind of coming in, and then he's also straying out, and he's not really standing on anything. Like he's standing on just like he's standing on a horizontal axle essentially. That's really all he has.
One for each foot. So he doesn't have a floor underneath him.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I'll invoke the the unreliable narrator piece again, right? Where this keeps coming up where he, on the one hand, he says he likes it up there. On the other hand, he says, "Don't put me up there. I'm terrible at this job." Right? Like he's terrible at it. Why? Because he can't pay attention. And why does he like being up there? To Tyler's sort of point, like when he's down on the ground, all he wants to do is rebel and knock hats off of people. That's why he's on the boat. Like he's on the boat to get away from people, and he likes the masthead to get away from the people he's getting away from other people with. It's like he's no satisfying this guy. It's impossible. Right? But then he can't be there because he can't do the damn job. And to some extent, the discomfort of the masthead is deliberate. You want people watching. You're watching for a bunch of things, right? You're watching for land. You're watching for any change in water that might, impact the boat, right? You're watching for whales, and you're watching for weather. Right. These are all important, very important tasks. And, you're only up there for 2 hours, I guess, which is even more amazing. And that's probably because it's uncomfortable and hard to do. And you do want that to be your peak 2 hours of, attention or something in order to make it work. But I think that's, really important that he, on the one hand, likes it. On the other hand, is terrible at it. On the other hand, thinks it's like this high thing, this platonic Descartesian sort of ideal or something odd. It's sort of hard to tell from how it's written about exactly, what that is. And yet he describes it in very stark and uninviting terms. So he's giving you this dichotomous picture of it as, a really important high job that, needs to be done, and which is obviously true, and also something that is not pleasant and comfortable and easy, but he needs that, him personally, but to screw off with. Like he doesn't need it to watch the weather and watch for the whales and do the work that's required on the boat. Which I find that utterly fascinating that he's, that he has that sort of attitude about it.
Where he doesn't warn everybody against it, right? He says specifically, "Hey, people who are kind of like me, where you put me up where it's quiet, where it's warm, where I'm rocking back and forth, like my mind's just gonna wander, and I'm gonna get into all this, philosophizing while I'm up here.
Right.
He says that's who it's dangerous for. You get the sense that if somebody remembered why they were up there and was very attentive to the job that they were doing, that they would be less likely to fall the way the the dreamer, the Platonist, the pantheist would be liable to lose their identity. So it's almost as if you go up there with a very firm purpose, you'll probably be safe and do well. But if you just like climb up there because somebody else is making you, unless you attend to what you're doing very carefully, decent chance you're going to fall over and things won't end well for you.
Right.
I wanted to make a quick comment on Ishmael as narrator here again, because there was something that I caught as he was talking about the guy named Sleet, how he had invented Sleet's crow nest. And he makes a comment here about, naming your own invention after yourself. And he says, we fathers being the original inventors and patentees, so likewise should we denominate after ourselves any other apparatus we may beget, which is an interesting idea, but also points that Ishmael is a father at the point that he's narrating this, which is also terrifying. Just a little bit, because I don't know. I'm seeing how he's handling the masthead. I can't imagine him attending to a child.
Well, I don't think the supposed child comes up again at all. So apparently didn't make that big of an impact.
Well, I think it's father of inventions, not father of children.
Yeah, but he does that ambiguity on purpose. Again, he's an unreliable narrator, right? And so it's not clear, to Castle's point. Like, he's off on a boat with no reference to a family, for example. And he is, at some point, claiming some fatherhood. Whether that's an actual child or an invention doesn't matter, because he's effectively said they're the same thing. And he's tending to neither of them. And that I think is what Castle's pointing out. He's not attending to anything. He's just out there on his whim. And he's out on a whaling boat on a whim to get away from his whims. It doesn't work. So he goes up further away. And it still doesn't work because he shouldn't be there. This guy is all over the map. There's no making him happy. There's no place where he's really content when there's other things going on. And see, this is what I keep pointing out, the unreliable narrator. This narrator wants a world that cannot exist. Does not exist. Cannot exist. Like, he really wants some liminal space, we'll call it. This is why I hate liminal spaces, because they're almost always a fantasy. He wants some liminal space where he can contemplate and have what he wants without any responsibility whatsoever. That's what he wants. But he doesn't want it all the time, because sometimes he tries to engage people in conversation, right? Maybe when the indication is when he shouldn't be. I don't know that that's clear in the chapter, but like I don't think he should be talking to those people right now, right? But he talks about trying to have conversations with these off-duty people.
Oh yeah, that when he starts ascending on his shift, that he actually stops like a third of the way up to talk to like Queequeg, and then he'll go another 20 feet and somebody's up there and he stops to talk to them. So he's already shirked. By the time he gets to the top, he's already shirked like a third of his shift.
And I see he makes this excuse for not being a good watcher up there. He says he has the problem of the universe revolving in me. So I suppose he thinks that his musings, his contemplating over everything is just so important that he has no choice but to neglect his duty and put his full attention to his philosophizing.
You see kind of like an excess of contemplation in place where there should be a little bit more practical action. Which is an Ishmael problem, not a whale fishery problem, because you send somebody much more practical up there, they're gonna do their job.
And he basically blames the captains too for even picking him in the first place.
Yeah, right.
Old Bill Dad was right about him. A 777 flay.
I mean, Father Eric, you have a lot of faith in people because, like when I look at that, 2 hours up there, like monotone. Yeah.
Well, there's three. There's three masts, and there's three people manning the mastheads.
Well,
So
there you go. That means that's a contingency already, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't expect
Well,
you to do
one person can't actually do it because you got to look 360 degrees.
Yeah, but you
on a
don't
boat.
have to have like full vision all the time. But yeah, it's just,
No, but you have to have too much that one person can't do it.
yeah.
Right. And the reason why you can have a crow's nest on some ships is because you only need one person, because you only need to look where you're going. When you're whaling, you don't know where you're going. You have no idea. You're going where you find whales. That's it. The navigation is a suggested route. It's not where you're going. You're going to where the whales are. And the whales may or may not be along your navigational preference. And that's the problem. So there's a fundamental difference between those two engagements. And that's why with one, you can be comfortable. And with the other, you cannot. And it sounded like this sleep thing that he was talking about, was a compromise, right? Because a crow's nest is fully enclosed. And this was not. It just had a thing you could move so the wind wouldn't be quite so bad on you or something. And I was like, I don't know.
Which can make a huge difference. Take it from me, who lives in a cold, windy state. If you can get out of the wind, it helps you a lot.
Right, but also it's this halfway point again, right? It's this liminal space problem. It's like, it's really not helping you in that way that much, and it might be hurting you because you're not paying attention the way you should. Right? And like, comfort is a dangerous thing because, yeah, if you're comfortable, you can focus in a way on certain things better. But what you're supposed to be doing is using not your focus, but your awareness, right? So you need your attention spread out when you're up there because you have to pay attention to the weather and the whales and whatever's on the water, right? Which may or may not be whales, right? Other ships, for example, right? And the location of any land or things like that you should avoid. Like, you have to, there's a lot going on, and you have to spread your attention out to do that effectively.
I think he even mentions that in the recounting of Sleet's invention, where Sleet had kind of done his own little like autobiography, that Ishmael says that like not enough attention and gratitude was given to his bottle of like whiskey or whatever it was that he had up there with him, because no doubt that was like a constant companion. So you just have this guy who's writing about himself and just like drinking alcohol and shooting at whales and stuff. And it's like, how much else is he actually doing up there, as far as navigation goes and looking at the weather and everything?
Some guys can manage that, and some guys really can't, and not many of us should try.
Fair enough.
Not many of us should try. I agree.
All right. Well, I think this next chapter is also pretty interesting. The quarter deck. So Ahab comes out after breakfast, and he seems to have a certain intensity about him that he is really focusing. And they look at him and describe him as if he's a storm that's about to burst over the ship. And then he gives a very unusual order to Starbuck that he needs to get everybody out on the deck, which is apparently something you would normally save for emergencies. And he gives them this whole speech right there about Moby Dick and his real intentions about this whaling voyage. He promises that the person who spies the white whale will get an ounce of pure gold and has that nailed to the mast. And you get the sense that he's kind of like a preacher. You can imagine, a revival in the Kentucky backwoods and he's really getting everybody fired up, and they're really doing all of that. The person who objects to it the most is Starbuck, right? The first mate. And, Ahab has a fiduciary duty to the people that he's getting captaining the ship for, right? And he's supposed to be going and getting whales in general. He's not supposed to be distracting people with this one particular whale. So Starbuck seems to have an objection to do with that, but it doesn't seem to have the fortitude to be able to contradict and take Ahab out of the picture. There, he can't stop Ahab from doing what he's doing, basically. Even though, as the first mate, if your captain goes crazy, you would actually have a duty to mutiny in that kind of a circumstance, and to make sure that he can't take the ship off course. Other interesting thing that I noticed is that Queequeg, Daggoo, and Tashtego were the ones who knew about Moby Dick ahead of time, right? So kind of the wild harpooneers were already familiar with him, while most of the other sailors did not appear to know him yet. So yeah, this is one of those chapters that really gets the plot moving forward. Oh, and they do like a have we gotten there yet? Yeah, they do like a reverse Eucharist there, where he's pouring grog for everybody, but they're just getting drunk on it instead of receiving it moderately.
Right. It's a celebration and a bribe over the whale. So an ounce of gold right now is worth like $2,600 or something. Not insignificant. Although the translated value might be a hell of a lot higher. I don't know what $16 is, but I suspect it's closer to like a year's wage than it is to $2,600. So yeah, I mean, there's very much this this shaking up of the normal order, right? Which is well stated by, and again, I mean, he's an unreliable narrator, but sometimes he just nails it, right? Sometimes he's just very journalistic. Or just the facts, ma'am. He's very, right, and this is one of those cases. They're like, well, this is unusual, right? And here's the pushback, and here's the captain said. He's not judging anything, right? He's just very matter-of-factly stating what happened in very reasonable terms. I think you see this a lot too, right? Our friendly narrator here seems to use more metaphors, more analogies, more symbolism when he's off in his crazy town head language, and then he's much more plain when he's just sort of reporting things. And so it's a good guide, right, to know, well, which is he doing? And I don't know, I mean, how deliberately you can do that as an author, but Melville seems to be able to no problem with it somehow. I suspect that it's pretty easy if you talk to authors or watch a lot of authors when they talk about writing. They will talk about characters writing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, when you're in the spirit of the character that you're writing, a lot of the work gets done in a way that doesn't really involve your conscious engagement or something, we'll say. That's a common theme throughout all the authors I've ever heard talk about writing. Very common. And
it's the really bad authors that are sitting there thinking about it.
Right. All the people sitting there thinking about it are bad authors. Right. Yeah, for sure. Anybody, doing a lit crit or analysis, they'll never write a good book. None of them. Well, you're never going to find that. Like the reason why you can't find it now and it's not pointed to, which it would be if it worked, is because it doesn't work. And it's not that hard, right? It's like the world is exactly the way it is because that's the way it is. And that's kind of good to know. As somebody who has done a bit of writing, that's definitely how it works. Like you think up a character. You don't even need to think up an ending or how things end or any of that nonsense. It's a complete waste of your time. You start writing characters and a story will emerge and write itself. Like you Very little effort on that side. The effort is in getting and staying in the character's spirit. Why that would be true, I have only speculation, and I don't. It's too off topic, we'll say, to share it. But it's very much this modality with this one character, this schizophrenia almost, if you will, where he's very journalistic and reporting, and then he's very fanciful and sort of justifying this liminal sort of existence. And so these two chapters are a nice example of that, where you go strictly from this weird liminal space where he's playing this game about being alone and not being alone at the same time, and wanting to do this job, this particular task, even though he sucks at it. And then you jump into this, which seems to be pure reporting, where when he's invoking something, we'll say, less concrete, it's about another character, and you get the feeling that it's the best way to describe them. Right, it's an accurate portrayal in some way, rather than, we'll say, anything else.
I think it's interesting because there is a little bit of between the transition between the two types that he's doing, there is kind of an interesting new element that starts appearing at the start of all of these chapters, which is he has in parentheses stage directions or something like that, enter Ahab, then all, and that starts happening over the next few chapters. So it's he's presenting stuff, as he kind of perceived it. Although as we go forward, there's some stuff where it's really, did he actually overhear any of that? But this one for sure is very kind of straight to the point, stuff that he would have actually seen. But I thought it was really interesting that it says right at the beginning, it was not a great while after the affair of the pipe, which is, when he tossed it away, that one morning shortly after breakfast. So literally that was 10 chapters ago or something like that. So, and that chapter, it was probably chapter 25 or something like that, or maybe even before, that it ended with Ahab throwing away his pipe. And now everything that happened in the book between then and now actually happened probably after. And we're just getting recompressed back in time to literally the same day, which is when this winds up happening.
Oh, I hadn't noticed that. This is the same. So we're time jumping in this.
Yeah.
Chapter.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's the same day. It was not a great while after the affair of the pipe. That one short morning after breakfast, ascended the cabin gangway to the deck. So I get the sense that it could be a day or two after the affair of the pipe. But we've had a lot of philosophizing since the last time we actually managed to move the pipe, the plot forward. So I don't get the sense that we're jumping around in time, but it is still moving mostly chronologically. But it certainly feels like it's taking longer because we're reading this book at a very leisurely pace. We're not cramming for an exam here.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I mean, there's actually an indication of that. That's why I asked Castle for clarification, because anybody could see something that I don't. That's for sure. Because there's an indication that they've traveled quite a distance. Right. But they're not giving a consistent indication, we'll say, of how far they've traveled to the south, which would be handy, right? Because, the interesting thing too, remember, we've already had a reference to the white whale. I don't think he called him Moby Dick the first time.
Because he learned the name from Tashtego.
Right, but this time it looks like Ahab acknowledged that was the name.
Yeah, he was probably learning it himself. So let's pull up that.
Well, I wanna point out, right? I think it was not a great while. When we're talking about a 3-year journey, a while. I don't know how much a while is at that level, but I also think it's important that it gets connected to the pipe, right? So there's a transformation and a sequence in the transformation. I think that's being highlighted mostly there.
So here we've got the first mention of Moby Dick in the book. It's Tashtego. This is Ahab. Moby Dick shouted Ahab, "Do you know the white whale then, Tash?" And then it seems like either Tashtego has seen Moby Dick himself or has got a reliable account of his appearance there, because they go back and forth and confirm that they're speaking about the same thing here. So it's these foreigners, the islander, the African, and the native Indian, I suppose, the Native American, who know about Moby Dick in a way that Ahab, doesn't, right? So it must just be like a harpooner's legend here.
So a couple things that I notice is there's an establishment of hierarchy, and basically there's also an invocation of the principle of in Dutch. Well, I think it's even in English, right? You're in the same boat. Like, so stop messing about. You're in the same boat,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's really important and missing from modern society. And like modern society is basically, if you look at the globalist idea, right, where you can just like go to a country and work for half a year and then go there, like you can just hop boats whenever you want, and the being bound to the boat, like basically means that you have to rebel. Like there's no other option. You either obey or you rebel. Like there's no middle ground. Well, now when we were talking about this half solution, right? Like in modern times, we're living in limbo, right? Like we're not living in actual rebellion because like we're not doing anything in the world, but we're also not living in boundedness because that's scary and like there's no authority that's worthy to be bound to, right? And in some sense, Ahab inherits his authority from his place in the world, right? Like he's the captain of his ship, but it's also like that's the only authority, right? Like you're gonna have to deal with the authority, and so questioning the authority is nonsensical, or like sensical in a different manner.
You mean like questioning the authority of Ahab here in this particular
Yeah.
system? I mean, it could be done, but that'd be a high risk, right? Because, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep him bound under deck for the next 3 years? Like, you could do that. That's possible. But, Starbuck, I'm thinking specifically of Starbuck here. He would have to override the very powerful influence that Ahab has on the men, who's able to basically just conjure up. He's basically able to convince them to take his mission on as his own, right? Through a little bit of bribery, but it's not just the gold, the gold that he's promising them, although that certainly gets people's attention. But it's also like he's able to infect them with the same purpose, that this whale is a beast. It's got unnatural authority on Earth, and that it should be killed as a matter of course there. Yeah,
And that's partially
Can
true.
we take a look at how Ahab does this? And in part, going back to Castle's kind of notes on how the text is constructed to a degree. We have these kind of vignettes in what strikes me as a series of three, and we have the I think it was like the bottom of some kind of spear that they were using the first time around when Ahab first swears the squires to we're going to go after this whale, and then now he's getting the attention of the entire boat, and he does this as Father Eric points out, kind of this anti-Eucharist thing with the grog, making sure that everyone's participating in something together and marking the event, and that's kind of how he brings them, at least how I'm noticing it so far. He's bringing them into this unity aimed at Moby Dick the whale. But it's interesting that Ahab himself hasn't even been able to really name this whale, this kind of sort of leviathan of sorts. And it takes the squire's involvement for him to be able to get to that point. So it's a naming here, but it's a different sort of naming that I don't quite have the right words for.
Yeah,
Well,
and also Ahab hasn't done anything wrong yet. Like, there's nothing wrong with what he's done. He has not yet usurped any captain's order. He's just said, "Hey, if you spot the whale, I'll give you the gold piece." Right? And
Because
then
of
he
course-
goes through this ritual, right? And the ritual, so Starbuck's concerned, right, which is proper. I keep going back. I obviously I'd never read the book, so I didn't realize the character of Starbuck. It's very much in literature after this, all over the place. Where that character came from. So I've been going back in my head. I'm actually watching the Battlestar Galactica reboot right now for various good reasons, and I keep going back and like, wow, that character, the consistency of that character and its corruption in that particular show and others is right there, right where Starbuck is not sure about this, right? But also not in a position and not able, and there's no cause to push back.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, what you see is this I want to call it a series of rituals. I think that's because it's not a liturgy, right? Or it's not a known liturgy or something. Series of rituals that Ahab is going through to get people on board with this whale. So on the one hand, you three know about him. Swear your harpoons on him or something. It's roughly what's happening, right? Everyone else is just drinking to him. But there's nothing wrong with an extra mission, while you're whaling. And if you see the white whale, maybe we'll give that preference. And, I mean, we got to preference the whales anyway. If we see a sperm whale and some other kind of whale, we're going to go after the sperm whale because that's the richest oil, right? So, he hasn't done anything wrong yet, but it's weird that he's using this ritual, that he's got all these great, and he sets it up for weirdness, like everybody aft. What? Everybody on deck and aft? Why? Well, on a ship, think about how a ship is shaped. That's where you can fit the most people, is aft. Right?
So I love that you made that connection, and it brings two things to mind. I'm only going to take up one. There's this, beloved part of The Princess Bride where, there are these two ships, and there's a princess is captured on one of them, and the captors look back and they start reasoning to themselves, oh, it's just a fisherman out for a late night pleasure cruise or something like that. And it really highlights this sort of severe anti-casualness that Ahab has been going around with like this kind of whole time. He's either in these kind of, and we'll get to this in a moment, he's kind of methodical and pacing and quiet, and then he has these outbursts where he'll run up, take the shroud by his hand and be like, look here, crew, we're going to do this. But it's also with a kind of tinge of like, we happen to be out whaling, and I happen to give you a year's worth of wages, and I happen to go off and really want this one particular whale. So he's trying to justify things from a land point of view, even as much as he's rebelling against them.
Right.
So I don't know if Ahab means what he thinks it means.
Okay. So a couple things. He puts the doubloon on the mast, so now it becomes sort of a totem, right? So like if the mediation is now in the doubloon, right? Because like the doubloon is now the signal for Moby Dick, then like that's basically now he's subverted the purpose. And another thing is, and I think this is maybe more important, by doing that, right, by putting the doubloon on the mast, he's removing it from himself and his obligation, right? Like so he's like RJ says, he's like really bombastic in this ritual, right? But he's also setting up a retreat, like he doesn't want to be the intermediate, right? Like he wants to put the spirit in the people and then remove the mediating responsibility. At least that's the way it seems to me.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, he has this separate ritual for the harpooners who are, quote, in the know, and he seems to be taking advantage of that and getting them to swear an oath. So they've sworn 2 oaths now. One is in contract, and the other is directly to the captain. And he also stares down the rest of the staff between him and the harpooners in the hierarchy. So that's actually really important, right? And again, he hasn't done anything wrong, right? He's put his money where his mouth is. Here's the coin, boys, right? You could have that. I don't care about your contract. This is in addition to your contract, just for spotting the whale. And so he's made this, for lack of a better term, unholy alliance between the bottom, because anybody can be up on the masthead, anybody at any time, except for the next 2 classes up, right? The bottom and the top, where he's linked, and he's using different. The harpooners ain't getting the coin because they're never going to spot the whale. They might get something else, but what he gives them is this sworn fealty and this drink, basically, to seal the oath that they'll go after the whale. So he's giving the different people different things. Nothing wrong with that. But he's linking the lowest and the highest on this mission independently. It's actually appropriate for a corporation or a government or any kind of hierarchy where the head sorts of gives the different layers different missions. Those missions are supposed to cohere and sort of go in the same direction and end in the same results, for sure. But like, you're supposed to have a different focus based on where you are in the hierarchy. Like, you have to. That's the purpose of a hierarchy, is to give you a place to focus on that's different from the other places in the hierarchy. So A, you're not overwhelmed, and B, you're able to specialize, and C, the focus that you give is not distracted by other things. Like, if the CEO has to worry about who gets a paycheck, that's a problem, right? So the CEO should have better and more important things to worry about than that.
So a few things clicked for me on this one that I was just kind of thinking about, like kind of the motion of the ritual and how this day is kind of going and everything. So Ahab, he makes the assembly at nightfall, and then so it gets darker, and then he calls the entire crew, who, by the way, are all like super multinational. Like, that kind of shows up in like chapter 40. And he takes this kind of like super, different group of guys and sends them all back to the base of the ship, which has the most body. And then so there's kind of like this downward motion that's happening the entire time. And then when he goes and he does the ritual, he has the guys who were able to identify the whale. So the identity is coming from the lowest guys, the harpooneers. And they're raising the identity, which is kind of a reverse to where usually the identity is emanating down from above. And they are the ones who are holding the pillars, and they put the pillars, or the harpoons, over Ahab. And so you have this kind of upside down hierarchy going on. And then he is then lowering, instead of lowering form and meaning onto his crew, he's lowering chaotic water in the form of the drink to get them all drunk. So he's lowering that down. So it really is like an upside down hierarchy that's taking place there. And so I'm just seeing a lot of these kind of motions of like them going back, them going at night, them going, all these guys being unified, and then them being unified around. I mean, you consider you have a super multinational crew, and even before, like, Ishmael had compared Ahab to like some French revolutionary who was actually known for just getting people from like random countries to just show up and start supporting him and everything. And that what they all I mean, most of these guys who are on the ship are there for money. Like that's, and not even that much, like just enough to cover their own clothes or so you have, if it's an entire year's wages or something like that, they didn't even really care that much. But now it is this kind of, you have the shiny reflective thing. I saw RJ kind of made a comment here, and that the reflective thing is now going to be like the point. It's almost like the focal point, or the thing that people are aiming at. That they're on the lookout for the whale, but the goal is actually the money, which is now up on the pillar that everyone can see.
Yeah, and it's no, it's like, of course it would be a gold doubloon. Like, what else could it possibly be? The
Yeah.
shiny golden, goal towards which everybody can orient themselves around. Like,
Like a star.
yeah. It wasn't going to be a banknote. Was it going to be a certificate of deposit or anything like that? No, it's going to be gold. Like that is, and he fixes it to the mast where it's like, this is something that everybody can see. It's elevated above you. You'll be reminded of it, the same way that we put crucifixes up in a church. Because we can point ourselves towards that, orient around it all together, and be continually reminded of that thing that is gathering us all together.
Well, and that's the center of the ship, that mast.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing he put on there, it's, even though it is a piece of gold and it's reflective, it's also money. So it's formless potential that actually isn't manifested in anything yet. So he's raised formless potential also as like, this high goal at the center of the ship.
And also they're drinking out of pewter cups. I don't think that's normal for the crew.
They're like wooden cups, you think?
Yeah, normally I think they'd be wooden cups, if I remember correctly. It's not, I mean, pewter wasn't unheard of, but like pewter is for the upper class. Pewter is not something the everyday person had in their home, for example.
Yeah,
and I'm fairly sure they referenced pewter earlier at the captain's meal sort of thing, right? How they eat separately and they have separate forks and knives and plates and stuff, right? Because they do. They definitely do on a boat that size that's going on a journey of a few years. That's definitely how it works. So it's interesting that he's bringing out the fine china for the lads, if you will. Right, this is all that lowering of the highest, the lowering of the. I mean, you can look at this in terms of the contrast of when he's getting on the ship. There's that whole argument about how much money he should make, right? And the justification for paying him so little is, think of the widows and orphans that we're running the ship for. And now you have Ahab, the third captain, right? The captain on the ship, not just the owner captains. And he's usurping that higher goal and lowering all this stuff down to it and giving accessibility of those higher things, be they gold or pewter, to the lower classes. Right. I think it's all super important.
Which can be done appropriately. When I'm at church, I'm giving communion out of a golden vessel. But it's definitely worth noting that this is that same kind of pattern where you could receive the consecrated species out of a golden chalice and a golden paten. To what end is that being directed? That's the question.
What's the telos? Make final cause great again.
Make final cause great again, baby.
And it also it assumes the pre-existing refinement of the recipient as well. Like
yes. So you need to discern before coming forward and receiving. Yeah.
If I could move from teleology to structure for a moment, I'd love to get Manuel and Taylor's thoughts, if they have any, on stepping back and looking at what the ship becomes once the doubloon is nailed to it. Especially, I'm thinking about in connection with Pajot's symbol, like the Pajotian symbolism of the axial point, and kind of how I mentioned in a previous session that the ship's mast is kind of like the point that marks you as being here. But what I'm trying to draw the attention to is, now that, especially now that the doubloon is now nailed to the mast and what the mast is, and merging those two, as Castle says, the potentiality with the structure of the thing you rely just to keep you stable, to walk upon and to navigate. I'm wondering if the nailing of the doubloon changes anything about the boat and the relationship with the crew to the boat, or if anything from that kind of perspective, looking at what the boat might mean to you guys now.
So I first want to point at the nailing, right? Because like a nailing is a deformation, right? You're puncturing the doubloon, unless there's a pre-existing hole in it, but I doubt that. So when we're talking about potential, it's deformed potential, though, right? And yes, it is attached to the mast. The association that I had is when your worldview changes to a heliocentric worldview, where you, like, the center has been contained in, or something, right? Like the source has been contained in the center instead of is seen as a source in a profound way. And now that move makes actually a lot of sense, and now I understand why this is really problematic, because like that's been done with psychology in the individual as well, right? Like this source of authority has been internalized in the person, like the psychology is the thing that dictates, and so when we're talking about what happened on the ship, I think it's a confusion. Like the order of things has been uprooted. One of the things that I wanted to add that happened to the ship is that Starbuck, and I don't know if this happens in Battlestar Galactica, but he kind of gets bound to the crew, right? It's because there's an appeal made to Starbuck. It's like, if they go out, you will not let them be alone, right? You'll surely go with them, right? So the appeal is not to the higher thing calling him, it's the appeal to the lower thing calling him, and his duty, right? So in some sense, he now becomes steward, right? So he's taking the captain role in a perverted way. So thinking about the ship, like, I'm also associating the gold with some sort of light, right? So like I see it as a light going across the chaos. So it's bringing light, and you could even see the responsibility of ridding the world of this mythical creature, right? Which upsets the order of things, right? Because it's got a name, right? Like, it's got a personal name. It it's got its own mythology around it. So there's a place that's been granted that upset the natural order, and I think that's also referenced actually in the chapter, right? So you can see it as a cleansing light that roams the waters of chaos. You can see it as a light that attracts, right, from the chaos onto it as well, because that's what moths, they go to the flame, right? Like, is so that's what I got in my head.
I had some thoughts about the gold coin, or sorry, what's the term? The balloon.
The balloon.
So you were all mentioning earlier about how the whole ritual that Ahab is putting on with the whatever drink it is, the alcohol that he's giving to them, and the pewter is like a kind of parody of the Eucharist in some way. I'm not sure if I'm completely off here, but I was getting a bit of, again, Eucharist imagery from when Ahab holds up the coin, like similarly to how a priest would hold up the host during Mass. Now, of course, okay, the crew are not going to be consuming the coin, but I guess with what Castle was saying about it being a seed, being money, something that you're going to spend, being just potential, there's I guess there's that relation. Whereas the Eucharist, the potential there is just spiritual. It's for grace. I I don't have I don't have the theological language to talk about it. But but then the coin that he's now putting up on the mast, as you've all been saying, to as the highest goal that is orienting the ship's crew is again another kind of perversion of the Eucharist that was the first thing I noticed, and I didn't really think too much about the drink until the rest of you pointed that out. But I also did have some thinking in relation to the crew of how in previous chapters, for the brief time that we've seen Ahab out and about, he's been almost entirely silent, just strolling around the ship, and all the crew have been doing their duties without instruction, without any asking for clarification on anything or any encouragement as they were getting from Peleg and Bildad. But yeah, I guess I was just noticing how the crew seems to be almost a perfect extension of Ahab. And so before it was when he was all brooding and ruminating and silent, the crew, I suppose, had a similar attitude. And now here, where he's having one of his outbursts, I'm noticing that like the first thing he does after he assembles all the crew is he starts leading them in this call and response. So like, what do you do when you see a whaleman? Sing out for him. They respond. So yeah, I suppose he's using this. So right away, there's participation in the ritual, I guess, between him and the crew, and it just keeps escalating up until the point where he's standing with the three mates and the three harpooneers and all the other crew surrounded around them, and they're all taking the drink. And yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is before it was out of like fear and obedience purely. I know Ishmael has repeatedly referred to Ahab as some terrible tyrant leading the crew, but now it seems that he's, in order to maintain the crew being like a perfect extension of his authority, he's opening up to them, he's offering them rewards. What you've been saying about how the pewter is unusually, I guess, posh for a ship of this kind, he's really, I suppose, extending his hand to them, trying to make them feel like they're very important, trying to gain their loyalty, and giving them an epic quest to go kill this whale that took off his leg. It seems to have completely enraptured and captivated everyone, aside from Starbuck, who only just gives a brief objection before being talked down by Ahab. So
I think that's a great catch. Something that I definitely didn't think about was just like the offer here is the quest. And there's definitely something to what Ahab's doing, which is, of course he's doing these things as a group, but like it's interesting on an individual level. I mean, definitely not individual. On a one-on-one level, from Ahab to any of these people participating, he is offering them something. And that I think definitely is very interesting.
And it's not based on the whale taking his leg. That's a secondary concern.
Yeah.
It's based on the prize. And the prize is twofold. There's a material prize in the coin, and then there's this idea prize that you will have participated in being the one that did the thing in the way that you're supposed to do it, whether you're a harpooner or whether you're just a regular schlub on the ship, right? And that's what you get people invested in, is ideas at that level. And that's what he's doing. It's very clever.
With the coin, there's a sort of internet etymology that kind of loosely points at that, the word dollar is a reference to striking or stamping of the coin. from the metal sheet, but I want to throw it to Manuel and ask because when I was looking it up briefly, it's in English, the word dollar is shortened from Dale, or, DALE. And I'm just wondering if Manuel has any, background knowledge or thoughts on, what the word dollar and the significance of the doubloon being struck from a greater piece of metal, to Castle's point about this potentiality thing from a symbol point of view, and if you happen to know like the word connection there on the also, I guess, sort of symbolist etymology point.
Yeah, I don't know about the dollar. Like to dal means to descend. So someone who dals is a descender. You do have a Dutch coin which is called a daalder. So maybe that's related to that.
I want to pick up on the Eucharistic imagery, and I don't think it's inappropriate to see the Eucharist in terms of a type of potential. And we could look at the very things that we use it for, or that are used for it. I mean, so on the one hand, in relationship to wheat, bread is actualized, right? So we've taken just regular wheat and we've turned it into something greater, actualized, and refined. But in relation to me, bread is potential, right?
Mhm.
It's something I take into myself, and it's going to provide energy and nourishment for something else, right?
It also provides refinement. So it
Yeah.
gets refined and then provides refinement. Yeah, that's important, right?
And so seeing these things as being somewhat related, although not directly related, because gold isn't good for eating.
But it is refined.
It is refined.
But it is refined, and it's refined down from that larger block, to RJ's point, right?
Yeah.
So there's refinement there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it provides refinement in that, spiritually it unites our souls to Christ so that we can participate in His life in the most intimate possible way here on this earth. And that it's got the very shape. So yeah, seeing the what Ahab's doing is kind of a parody of the Eucharist is not inappropriate. I also am reminded of something that Peugeot said that really struck me, is that it's unnatural for there to be a direct connection between the peasant and the king, or it should only be like a very exceptional kind of circumstance. And there's supposed to be layers of mediation between the king and the person at the very lowest. You're not supposed to have like a direct connection, or if you do, it's very unusual and exceptional, right?
Right.
So same thing in the church, right? Not everybody needs to have direct access from the bishop. They go through the vicar general, they go through me, they go through their pastor, all these different layers of mediation. But here, Ahab's promising the doubloon to whoever gets it. He's making it directly to them. There's not the order passing, through the different mates and through the different layers of tradition in the maritime expedition there. So again, things are not going by the ordinary orders of things.
I want to point out just a little bit more of this sort of like Ahab as anti-pope, almost like he explicitly even refers to himself like a pope and refers to the mates as his cardinals. And I wanted to add that, while the mast is a vertical post, also there's also like a crossbeam that has the sails come down on it. So there's this Eucharistic image that he's literally nailing to a cross at the center of the ship. And then to Tyler's point, the sort of word for kind of receiving would be communion, but then this is more of like a consumerism or a commercialism or something like that, and only one person can get it. So like everyone is kind of going for it, and in many ways, but only one person actually gets the coin in this particular case. And it's kind of it's a competition.
Yeah.
And that he's kind of, even though there's sort of like this he's using a lot of the papal imagery, and even uses like Saint Vitus's imp, like, oh, as if I understand the way he wrote this right, that the cup would have been full if not for Saint Vitus's imp. And Saint Vitus, like in his story, he took part in an exorcism before he was martyred, and that you have this kind of thing like, oh, there's like a demonic force that's draining the cup, and oh, we're kind of the mission, we need to get the drink and everything. And that, I saw Father Eric kind of highlighted the bit at the end where he even said, they make the oath, and then he goes and just kind of includes everybody with this thing, God hunt us all if we do not hunt Moby Dick to his death. And it's just like, you really want to be involved in that? You want to take that oath?
Yeah. So a couple more things. Nailing the doubloon is like hanging the cross in the church, right? Like that's also kind of like the center reference and it's that's also nailed. And then the second thing, that's the second part, is the drinking the blood of Christ, right? That's supposed to wash away, right? So it's supposed to be the source of change that will allow you basically to commune with God. And the way that it's described in this ritual, right, it's the fiery waters. Like, so the fire water, right, like the way that the Indians describe alcohol. But I also see it as like, well, okay, we're washing ourselves in chaos, right? Like, because that's what fiery waters are. Like, they're like the expression of chaos in order to face Moby Dick, right? So instead of washing themselves in the divine, they're washing themselves in this chaos element to meet chaos instead of to meet God.
It draws to mind just the image of Queequeg jumping into the ocean to save the one guy, and he came back covered in brine. And there's this kind of like, you enter into the realm of Moby Dick, and you are then covered in an additional sort of skin, or you're washed in something that when you go back onto, like dry footing, you're kind of unclean at that point.
And making an oath is like carrying a burden, right? Like, so they took up themselves a cross.
Alrighty.
Oaths bind is just the
Right.
very quick point that I want to point out. They are symbolically something that actually binds you to something else.
All right. I've got something very interesting to highlight here directly from the task. So I think at this point, Ahab and Starbuck are having their little discussion here. And Ahab's explaining to him why Moby Dick's got to go. I see in him outrageous strength with an inscrutable malice sinewing it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate. And be the white whale agent or the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him. Talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. And so looking at what's motivating Ahab here, it's like, I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. I actually am supposed to be in charge. Whatever you're doing, you need to explain it to me. And if you don't, then you're in the wrong, and I'm going to come after you there. And and be the white whale agent or the white whale principal, right? It's like, well, what does he mean by that? Who exactly is Moby Dick, or is Ahab hunting here, and what exactly does Moby Dick represent? I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. So we just see this extraordinary arrogance coming out of Ahab here.
And it's a sort of prideful flattening, too, of like raising himself up. Like, if the sun could strike me, then that means that I could do it back in turn. And it's just like, really? Like, yeah, you're going to face up against the sun in that case. It strikes you, and that means you're just strong enough to do it back. So I don't know.
Given Melville's context and some of the other allusions in the book, especially Ahab's name, I can't help but see an allusion to Nimrod here, and the Tower of Babel specifically. No, it's if he could, he would. Really means he's kind of somewhat in the same spirit, and in literature sense, that makes him a parallel, if not superimposed figure onto Ahab. And there's very much that spirit of Nimrod that we're seeing in Ahab as far as his flattening of things that we've just picked up on a moment ago.
And I think might be useful to keep things moving along here. I think you gentlemen would talk endlessly about these things, but I think we should move on to chapter 37. And in chapter 37 again, it starts off with those stage directions, as we had noted already. There, it's an interesting literary device. The cabin by the stern windows, Ahab sitting alone and gazing out. And I guess we just have a soliloquy here of Ahab talking to himself, talking about that he's wearing this iron crown of Lombardy. And he talks about how the beautiful sunset that he's seeing no longer soothes him. In fact, it causes him anguish. So just this very short chapter here of kind of the internal monologue of Ahab here.
I think with that he's gone not only from referring to himself as Pope, but also the Iron Crown of Lombardy, I think, was the crown worn by the Holy Roman Emperor. Mm-hmm. So he's Emperor and Pope on the ship, and then he even refers to himself that he says, by one cogged circle fits into all their various wheels, and they revolve. So he's like this kind of, yesterday we were kind of talking about like the horizontal axis, like kind of turning the wheel, and it's like he's identifying with that while also conferring on himself literally like the authority of Pope and the crown of like emperorship at the same time. But also, how is Ishmael getting this?
Right, unreliable narration for sure. But the idea that the sunset isn't good for him. Like, another day has passed and Moby Dick is still out there. That's the implication that's drawn, and that shows you where his focus is.
So I can't help but wanting to draw in certain parallels to Dante, and perhaps just because I've been reading it recently, or perhaps because there's just some similarity there with this descent into this quest towards redemption, but not quite aimed at it. But the thing that no longer soothes him seems to be parallel to the opening, being in the dark woods of the soul. And here we see Ahab being somehow lost, still even pursuing his quest. Like, he's gone through these things, he's recruited these people, he's on his quest, and yet now we learn that at least now, and perhaps before, but at least now. So I prefer to see it as right now in the story, that Ahab is falling into something that is not the leap of faith.
We notice Ahab is trying to be his own prophet here. So I lost this leg. I now prophesy that I will dismember my dismemberer. Now then, be the prophet and the fulfiller one. That's more than ye great gods ever were. I laugh and hoot at ye cricket players, ye pugilists, ye deaf Burks and blinded Bendigos. I will not say, as the schoolboys do to bullies, take someone on of your own size. No, you've knocked me down and I am up again, but ye have run and hidden there. So just this extraordinary arrogance where he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to prophesy for myself and fulfill the prophecy. Y'all get out of my way and watch out because I'm up to it.
Right. He's starting up the mountain and he's encountered the beasts and the things that are there. Except in this case, it's the frontier of the ocean.
And he's the One Ring. The Pope and the King and the prophet and the person who fulfills the prophecy, and therefore.
Yeah. Right. It was the merging of the Pope and the Emperor thing with the Iron Crown of Lombardy that certainly kind of connected me to some of those same issues. The working out of temporal authority and spiritual authority, and the powers thereof that are granted with that. and the taking of it all onto himself after these rituals may be the triggering thing that we're now seeing.
But there's also a flattening happening, because after referencing the crown, he's like, it's iron that I know, not gold. Right. So he's relating it back to the mundane and saying, no, like everything happens in the material mundane level. And like you can sort of with your higher level.
Yeah, I was going to point out how at the very end he says that like he has a path to he sees, I guess, hunting and killing Moby Dick as a fixed purpose, like something that he is unchangeably aimed at. He says the path to this purpose is laid with iron rails, and so okay, iron rails, and then the iron crown. Like all the mentioning of iron here is, I'm not really sure what to make of that exactly, but I'm also thinking that okay, so right before he says that he's making a prophecy for himself, and then like being both the prophet and the fulfiller of the prophets, but then he says he feels that this is just an inevitable thing, like he's completely predestined to hunt and kill this whale. There's nothing he can do about it, and his only choice in life is to just go along with it.
Which is ridiculous. Because he could just say, dang, that ended badly for me last time. I think I'll just avoid the white whale from now on.
Yeah, well, if he had an authority above him, he could do that. And
Right,
this is
and
the real
this
issue.
is
Right. He doesn't have an authority above him anymore, and that's why I highlighted the claim that he's like the One Ring. Right.
right
Because
from
with that
Ahab's
ring-
point of view. It would be, well, what else is there? There's nothing but flatness.
Well, no, there is something, and that's this purpose.
Right.
Well, the question is, can Ahab see the spirit?
Yeah. Well, and iron is one of the lowest forms, right? Is it iron and then clay in language creation? I think, right? Like,
Yeah, but clay doesn't always fit in.
no, but we're not using it here, so yeah. Like,
See, I don't know if Ahab can look up in that sense.
Exactly. He's only looking down. Yeah. No. The material point and the quality of that material being so low is the indication that
But to put it in real terms, I think Tyler was really hitting on it. So I'd love to get his thoughts on just, is like, what do you see here with Ahab kind of falling into, I hate to use the word depression, but it's this chasm of lack of meaning in his quest for meaning, preventing him from being able to see alternatives. I'm wondering if you or Castle have any thoughts on that.
Oh, please.
Oh, thank you. No, just quickly, the first thing I thought when I read this passage was that there's a kind of nihilism, but that's not technically right, because he does have, well, there is a goal he's pursuing, but he feels like he's a complete slave to it. Like it's something he needs to do. There's no enjoyment or meaning he's going to get. It's like, yeah, it's a goal he has to achieve, but for no gain, it seems to me.
the destructive end.
Yes, exactly.
The destruction of your goal means you don't have a lasting goal, because if you achieve it, you destroy it.
But I do think it's righteousness. It's just self-righteousness. That's
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely righteousness. That's not the issue. The issue is it's nihilistic, and it's nihilistic because you're destroying your goal. Your goal is destruction. When your goal is destruction, that actually is nihilism. It doesn't look that way immediately, but that's what it is.
Okay.
So is Ahab so locked in anyone's point of view that he can't even that he's prevented from even stoicism?
No. I mean, the Stoicism, yeah. The famous problem with Stoicism is it contains no whys. Stoicism is independent of all of that. That's why it's not something that can help get you out of nihilism. It can stave it off, which is exactly what's happening here. Like, having a goal of any kind delays your nihilism, right? And if you can get a goal,
certain kind of goal, like a very certain kind of goal.
No. Having a goal of any kind staves off nihilism. The question
Oh,
is
okay, yes,
whether
yes.
or not the goal reciprocally opens or widens,
Right.
and allows you to reach
That's
up
the kind
and
of
look
goal.
up. Then that gets you out of nihilism, right? And a lot of people can stay in nihilism for a very long time, especially if they're Stoics. That's really easy to do, because they can just go from goal to goal to goal. And if none of those goals looks up or is up, then they're not moving in relation to the nihilism, but they're also not moving in relation to the nihilism still stalking them in some sense. Right. And that's where the problem is. People don't understand that. If your goal is destructive, if you're in opposition or in rebellion, or you're trying to get rid of something rather than cooperate with it, then you're nihilistic. You just don't realize it yet. You're on the nihilistic track, and that train's coming. Like, there's no way around it. Like,
So
you have to look up.
it seems then, when we boil this down from what I've heard so far, guys, that the world is kind of growing stale for Ahab, even in his quest.
No, it was already stale for Ahab. You
Yeah,
get
like-
hints of that because he's not seen on the ship for a very long time, right? And so he's brooding in. The implication is that he's brooding in his obsession, in his negative, destructive, nihilistic obsession, and he's staying below ships, right? In the winter, fair, but below ships until the goal becomes proximal, right? And the more proximal the goal becomes, the more he engages with it, right? Early on, he engaged with it and said, like, all right, we're underway. If you see a white whale, let me know, right? But now he's making that goal a little more concrete that they're further into the journey, which is, all right, the white whale's name is Moby Dick, and I'm going to give you something if you, right? So you can see he's coming out of his shell now that his goal is upon him, right? And so from the perspective of the person who's nihilistic, your nihilism is greater when you're further from a goal that can keep you at least steady with relation to the nihilism, even if it's, again, a negative goal, right? That's why, I mean, Stoicism works. If someone's nihilistic, get them to be Stoic. Why? Because you arrest their immediate fall into nihilism no matter what. You'll at least slow it down. If not, you may stop it, but it won't make them better. Stoicism never makes anybody better because it has no why. And you don't need just any why. You need a positive why that opens you up to the cooperation with the world, right? It can't be oppositional or destructive.
And that's impossible for Ahab right now. I'm gonna push us forward a little bit to chapter 38, but chapter 38 is also about Ahab. It's just Starbuck's reflection on Ahab here, and Starbuck's just very upset by all these things because he can see the madness in it, and he's got this great line in here, and I think that you combine that with the inscrutableness of Moby Dick, and the previous chapter, we get a very clear idea of what's going on with Ahab. Starbuck's saying, "Who's over him?" Ahab cries. "I, Ahab, would be a Democrat to all above. Look how he lords it over all below." Right? That's just a great line right there, because Ahab thinks he has a right to a vote with Moby Dick and whatever it is that Moby Dick represents, and he's not able to just say, "Oh, this happened to me. It was a tragedy. I guess I'll move on." Right? He's got this drive inside of him to say, "No, I should have a say in this, right? And you need to explain yourself to me, or I'm just going to destroy you because it's your inscrutableness is insufferable to me." And what that ultimately is an inability to submit to something that you don't understand. And man,
Or something outside of you.
or something
Whether
outside
you
of you.
understand it or not.
Yeah.
The understanding doesn't help you to submit.
No, it doesn't, right? Like,
Well, that's the age of gnosis problem. Knowing won't fix or change anything in the world. Oh, I know what my medical problem is. Yeah, that's nice. That's not going to help you one little whit, right? It might make it worse, though, right? And oh, I know how to program. Okay, that's not going to help you sit down and write software, right? Like I tried to write a story and I couldn't do it, so I went into software engineering. Yeah, writing's writing, buddy. You're going to have the same problem. Like, you still have to sit down and do the work. And so the knowledge really doesn't help, and often it makes things worse.
And
Okay.
the thing that gets invoked here is pity, right? So and all you can do is pity. Like, oh my, like this guy,
Mm.
he's so screwed. Like, and people don't like that when you pity. Like, pity is something that it's looked upon with disdain, right? Because like it's condescending, right? Like there's an implication of having a higher vantage point that you can look up on the other person, so that's where you can see have the pity from effectively. But there's also a sense of maybe hopelessness is not the right word, but I'm still going to use it, right? Like, and the hopelessness is in, I don't have any agency to resolve this situation, right? That's what pity means, right? It's like, no, you're screwed and you're going to have to get yourself out of it, or you're going to have to appeal to God to get out of it. And I cannot help you with that. Like, you're just trapped there. And when people have that happen to them, obviously that resentment that they harbor will come out.
I wanted to so Starbuck is here kind of pitying Ahab, but he also says, I think I see his impious end, but feel that I must help him to it. And it just reminds me that earlier on when Starbuck was introduced, Ishmael kind of references that, oh, he's going to do something that's maybe out of his usual stoic character that he usually has. He's very, there's nothing unnecessary about him. He's very kind of steadfast and everything. And yet some sort of event happens that seems like, at least, Starbuck does something that is contrary to his character. But then we're kind of seeing, okay, interiorly, or at least maybe Ishmael is projecting it, that Starbuck, maybe there's something more intentional about what's going to wind up happening, as opposed to, he gets afraid and then drops the ball in some way. Maybe it looks like an accident. I don't know. But just kind of a little bit of foreshadowing there. And I just wanted to add just a couple of quick notes about the who's over him, and also the heaven insulting purpose that Ahab has that Starbuck references here. I'm just thinking a little bit of kind of like Moses going up the mountain, kind of comparing the two other captains. They're now on dry land, and now there's this kind of descending into exile, sort of out into the ocean. And I just wanted to point out kind of the circular imagery a bit here, that the word for golden calf is eglon, which means go around, and it can mean an untamed animal or a young animal, but also a chariot or a wheel. And the word for Leviathan in Hebrew also means a wreath, like a wreath, which can mean that which is wound around. And then so there's also this whole thing of, Ahab's there, everyone is in a circle around him. Everyone is also around the circle that he is kind of orienting them to, which is now at the center of the ship. So when you do anything around the ship, you're actually circumambulating this thing, which you set at the center. So you have the gold representing the goal of the whale. So everyone is kind of circling around the circle, no matter like which scale you're looking at it.
And I like the connection to the fishbowl. The seas are made as a fishbowl, and what happens in the fishbowl.
Yeah, a lot of self-similar fractal patterns in this part for sure.
Then in the second half of chapter 38, Starbuck is kind of lamenting the crew that he's with. To sail with such a he's of the crew that have small touch of human mothers in them, whelped somewhere by the sharkish sea. So it seems like out of everybody on the crew, the only one who minds Ahab's blasphemy is Starbuck, and everybody else is quite happy to go along with it. We see that in chapter 39. Stubbs just laughing about it, right? Because that unfailing comfort is it's all predestined, right? Everything's just kind of predestined. So, why should I worry about it? I'll just go ahead and laugh at it. And he also notes that Starbuck felt the same way after his conversation after Ahab kicked him. We remember the previous chapter, Ahab gave Stubb quite the kick, and that kind of set Stubb back in line there. but he's just kind of singing, and he just doesn't really seem to care about what just happened, you know. So you could
Well,
have
Father, can you highlight the to sail with such heathen crew? I don't know why I didn't see. I don't know how it's possible I didn't see that the first time, but that well, whatever. I just gotta go through it. Like that actually just supports all the stuff that we talk about in terms of heathen crew and missing the divine feminine or access to the divine feminine as such, which I find fascinating, right? So he's connecting the loss or the lack of proper mothering to not understanding the proper relationship with the highest or something. And I think that, well, I mean, that just supports all the theories we work on Mark of Wisdom. So I don't know why I didn't, like, how could I not see that? But there it is, plain as day. Melville confirms the stuff that we've been talking about, obviously.
and he saw it, what, 170 years ago?
Oh, everybody knew it. Like everybody knew it. We lost this information and this way of thinking. Right. Well, and this is technically, we're not medieval, right? So this is still what Jonathan Peugeot might refer to as medieval thought or medieval way of thinking about the world. But actually it's right here in Melville still. And I think you're going to see more of that probably. I mean, we've seen some of it already, I would argue, but you're going to see more of that medieval thinking as opposed to the quote modern, I don't like that term, the age of gnosis thinking is probably the better way to think about it, right? Where you're privileging propositional knowledge of the world over experiential and platonic form-like understandings of the world or interactions with the world that inform how you know, how you perceive things, right? And because I mean, it's a direct statement. Like, they would see what I see, but for their lack of mothering, right? Like, just flat out. That's really what he's saying. Like, and I wish they weren't like this, because then they wouldn't be heathens. And we've already established early on, boy, there's a lot of heathens on this ship, right? In general, because whaling is over 20%, according to the Whaling Museum in New Bedford, natives from islands, basically. So they haven't even been exposed to the
civilization,
Catholic or Protestant, because those are different things, traditions, right? They're not even aware of them in a way.
So, Father, can you put it back up? Because in the next line, it says that the bow shoots through gay and bantering bow and dragging Ahab, the corrupting influence behind it, right? So when we're talking about in the next chapter, stop resigning himself to fate, right? Here we see the opposite of it, right? It's like, no, the fate is good, right? Like the ship is good inherently, and the corrupting aspect is the captain. He's the one dragging us into all of this, right? And the other perspective is basically, no, the fates drag us into this. Like, this is all predestined. This is a matter of agency. Like, what are we orienting towards, right? Are we orienting towards the immediate, or are we orienting towards the ideal that is informing what should happen, and therefore we can judge Ahab effectively on deviating from the ideal.
Well, since we're talking about the crew, let's get into chapter 40, right? Because this was a wild chapter, and very interested to see what you guys noticed here. This chapter does a complete shift of genre, and it's written in the form of a play, right? And a play is a very interesting thing. I happened to actually direct Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat my last year of seminary. And what happens is that you just get, like, so for Joe and the Coat, it was music, but you just get some basic stage directions and lines. And as a director, you have to interpret it into, okay, well, so-and-so is going to be over here. So-and-so is going to be over here. There's a group of people over there. This is what the set looks like, and here's how they're going to do it. So when you put it in this kind of framing, it's almost as if there's less of Ishmael in there, and you get to bring your own imagination into how this looks right here, which is a bold move to just suddenly switch characters, and you really get the sense of the internationality of it. You know, we've got Nantucket, we've got the Dutch, French, Iceland, Malta, Sicily, Long Island, Azore, China, Tashtego and the Old Manx Sailor, Lascar, Tahiti, Portuguese, Denmark, English, Spanish, St. Jago. I don't even know where that is, right? And the only pattern, Belfast, and Pip right here at the very end. And the only pattern I was able to notice, and I hope you guys are able to notice, is that all of the people from the Mediterranean seem to talk about women and how much they missed them the most. But everything else just was chaotic to me. So you all explain this chapter.
Well, I want to preface this by saying this isn't so sudden, because Castle pointed at this earlier. He's already giving place directions before this. So he is leading into it somewhat. And you could get all, boy, I hate the term, but everybody for some reason understands it, meta about this and say, what what is Melville doing with the framing, right, with respect to the narration? Because that's this book is heavy on the framing with respect to narration issue, where he's very much playing with that. I mean, I of course it wouldn't be called and couldn't be considered postmodern, but that is a similar sort of trick. It's I would say it's totally valid here because it's rooted in certain traditions and medieval thought, we'll say, as referenced earlier. But the question really is, what is he leading into? Because again, the narrator's unreliable. That's not to say that the narrator's lying necessarily, although that certainly seems to be true, right? But that's an arguable point. But the narrator's not narrating the same way all the time at all. And if you needed any proof of that, well, you're not going to get around it here, to your point. Like now he's just talking about a play. And as a literary device, from my perspective, from my amateur perspective for sure, but from my perspective, what he's doing here is he's just trying to find a way to exemplify the differences in the different crew members and so one way to look at this is to say, all right, what happened? We've got the original telos of the ship and feeding the orphans and the widows, right? That already came down originally from getting on the ship and signing the contract. That was made explicit, right? And then we've got this change of the guard. Two captains who captain owners are gone. The real captain of the ship, because the ship only ever has one captain. No matter how many captains or admirals are on it, there's only ever one captain. There's a procedure for making an admiral a captain, et cetera, right? It's very formalized for this reason. Now we have a change of captains, right? Now this captain doesn't seem involved in the beginning of the journey, except to say, hey, if you see a white whale, let me know, sort of thing, like sort of setting the stage. But then he changes the goal. The goal is no longer widows and orphans. Now the goal is, depending upon who you are, right, the gold coin, the engagement with the destruction of the evil whale, right, of Moby Dick, right, or vengeance. And then we have the pushback from Starbuck. So now we have the perspective of everybody at the top of the hierarchy. And the way to look at this, I think, is to say, all right, well, now we need the perspective of people down below. What's their telos? What are they looking for on this journey? What is their stance or orientation to the journey, right? Because we've not just gotten telos, we've gotten orientation. Harpooners are harpooners. That's what they do. The captain's the captain. That's what he does. Starbuck. Like, all the characters have a telos and an orientation. And now, what's the telos and orientation of the crew? Right. Well, I gave you their telos. Their telos has now been corrupted, right, to some extent. But what's their orientation? Well, their orientation is, yeah, all the Mediterraneans are looking for women, roughly speaking, right? That's part of their orientation. It's not their whole orientation. And so I think that's the way to read this, is just as a literary device to give you that contrast so that you see the greater corruption. Because of course you kind of, to some extent, you haven't been able to see it because you have a poor relationship with your mother or something, according to Starbuck. So I think that's how I'm gonna understand it, I think.
I want to add to that actually because it's interesting. There's a so I took a quick glance just while we were here and looked, and the play directions actually don't continue for like at least the next 14 chapters or something like that. So this is kind of like the grand finale that we've had 4 chapters in a row that have had increasing amounts of kind of playness. And now we're seeing like the grand finale that's happening here. And to your point about, getting the perspectives of all the hierarchy, we didn't hear from Flask, but he was already corrupted. So he already hated whales and literally saw them as like rats of the sea. So we don't need to get his perspective because he already hated the whale. It didn't matter who the whale was. If it was a whale, he just hated it instantly. So like everyone is now kind of, that Flask is kind of in the background. He was kind of like at the bottom. Or he was already at the back of the ship.
He was
essentially
already at the back of the ship, right? Yeah, that's very much the point. Yeah, so we just need to fill in the orientation of everybody now that the telos of the boat has been reoriented. We need to find the orientation of the entire set of hierarchy.
And so the Frenchman really wants to dance. The Mediterraneans want women. The Spaniard wants to fight Dagu. And so it's sort of an inverse of the end of Isaiah, where in Isaiah it talks about the wealth of the nations are all going to be brought into Jerusalem, and the wealth of the nations is going to be different depending on what nation it is, right? And so that's kind of the image of the church right there, that everybody gets gathered together from every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and they bring what they have towards the higher purpose, and it all gets purified and it's made good in the eternal city. And this is what happens when you decide that you're going to replace the highest purpose with a foul and nefarious purpose. Is the men just kind of go wild and party as they're accustomed to, and there's a really horrible line here from the Belfast sailor, right? Where's Belfast? Northern Ireland. There's the Protestant hold here. And a row, that's a fight. The Virgin be blessed, a row plunge in with ye. So he's looking forward to watching Dagu and the Spanish sailor fight. The only thing that stops it is a new telos that is given to them. There's a storm coming in. A squall, jump my jollies. And then Pip, apparently he's a boy, I think, just a little black child, calls upon God to save him from it. We'll see if God hears his prayers.
I like the imagery of the kind of the heavenly Jerusalem that we're seeing, kind of like the upside down hierarchy of that instead of all the nations raising up their various different types of wealth and glory to the heavenly Jerusalem, everyone is like reciprocally narrowing all of their depravity down into this pit that's all kind of mixing at once, at the bottom of the drain.
Well, and this sequence is exactly a reverse sequence. It is a very, here's the corruption coming down from above, from Ahab, and this is how it manifests at the next level. And this is how it manifests at the next level. This is how it manifests at the bottom.
So, how's the liturgy in the church? Isn't the liturgy that you sing first, and then you got a bunch of evaluations, and then you get the sermon?
Yeah, you first off, you got to gather everybody together, and then they process in an orderly fashion to song. To your point, then you confess your sins, and then you hear the word, and then you hear the word explained, and then you recite the creed. That cuts off the liturgy of the word. The first half. The second half is you prepare the altar. You offer the sacrifice, and everybody communes in the sacrifice. You cleanse the vessels so that they can be used again. You do the closing prayer, give everybody a blessing, and kick them out.
Right, because I see there's somewhat of an inversion there, right? Where there's the singing, the jolly,
Well, there's
like,
there's
in some sense it's confession, right?
Yeah.
Like
The singing's
there's
at the
least-
end. Yeah.
Well, there's
And-
also very often you'll have a feast after mass, especially if it's a joyous occasion. So I'm not necessarily going to see, right? So like, let's imagine like an ordination. There's always a luncheon afterwards, or at least some kind of treat to celebrate what we've celebrated. So this actually, I think, fits kind of perfectly here, that they've done this dark liturgy, and now they're having the celebration afterwards. But instead of it being just sober and joyous and full of light, it's drunken and debauchery and violence.
And it's anti-communion.
Yeah, because they ended a fight. Yeah.
So when I was, because I'm still doing the audiobook, right? So I think this was a guy who I hadn't heard before, and it was an old sailor guy, and he actually sang the song, and he did all the sailor voices, and yeah, that was an experience, because yeah, like I think. Oh, we talked about this in respect to Plato. Like sometimes these things actually should be experienced as a play, not only like read as a play, but like they should have been given voice and body. Because yeah, like you are getting a sort of the polarity, right, or even the globalistic framing, and everybody bringing in their home into this microcosm of the ship. And I want to point at the first Nantucket sailor at the start. Don't be sentimental. It's bad for digestion, right? So I think that's a reference to what they just partook, right? And in some sense, when we're talking about telos, right? Like, yes, effectively God is interfering at the end to divert them from fighting, but they are already diverted from the telos presented by the golden doubloon, because they're not there with their minds at all, and they're not digesting anything.
But sentimentality also, I mean, it's related to nostalgia, looking back. So don't look back. Don't contrast this with anything. Just go with the debauchery. Go with the new telos. Don't even think about...
Consume the new product.
Don't even think about the contract you signed. You signed a contract that basically, you're going to interfere with potentially. See, and again, the problem is Ahab's right on the line. He hasn't actually done anything wrong yet. He hasn't said we're not going after any other whales. He's just preferencing one whale. He hasn't said ignore your contract or your oath to the other captains, captain owners. He hasn't done that yet. I get the feeling that at some point it might become an issue, but it's probably just some more foreshadowing. That's my guess.
And just as you foreshadowed, Melville foreshadowed the end of the book a little bit at the beginning, you just foreshadowed me ending the live stream here, because 2 hours is long enough, I think.
You're welcome, Father.
You gotta butter your throat with some good old Amsterdam butter.
So, gentlemen, once again, a delightful reading here. Glad that each and every single one of you made your contribution, and I'll post the next week's reading in the Discord. So, thank you, and God bless you all, and stay away from the white whale.